Hi folks. So I think like a lot of people, I came to science fiction through moving pictures before I consumed it in book form. So I thought I'd take you through what tickled my fancy when I was a kid before we go on to the serious business of science fiction books. My earliest memory of anything that might be considered science fiction in moving picture form was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now the film came out a couple of years before I was even born, so it must have been a reissue at the cinema because my father took me, and I can't have been much older than 5, maybe 6, and so of course it went like totally over my head, and particularly the first third or whatever it is, where we're just talking about apes bashing each other over the head with leg bones. I didn't really understand what that was about or what they were saying, and no one was talking. I mean, what sort of movie is that to take a kid to? But when that famous segue between the spinning femur bone and the rotation of the space station, it kind of just blew my mind. That image is really stuck in my head. So I didn't know what the hell was going on. I didn't understand 95% of it, but my little head was kind of blown by the whole experience, and that really stayed with me. So fast forward a few years, or maybe even a year or two, actually not very far, 1977, when Star Wars, the OG Star Wars, when it was just called Star Wars because there was only one episode, episode 4, if you want to be a pedant about it, that came out of the cinema. And I remember distinctly my father, there was an element of subterfuge involved because I was 6 and my brother was 3. He was too young to go to the cinema of a Sunday evening, so my dad told me that I had to go to church again. So this would be the second time, which is just unbelievable punishment for a young boy of 6. Once was bad enough. And I obviously protested and screeched, and probably much to his irritation. But anyway, we went, he dragged me kicking and screaming towards the church, which was on the way to the cinema. And I was very pleased when he told me that we were going to cinema. Anyway, we went to the cinema. It was the Odeon Well Hall in London SE9. And it was a bit of a flea pit, but it had loads of posters in the entrance hall, which looked amazing to my little eyes. I think I might even have persuaded my father to buy me one. I was long gone if he did, which is a shame because it's probably worth some money. But anyway, we went to see it, and viewers, I fell in love. Yes, obviously with Princess Leia, but also with the Rebel Alliance, with the cheeky Han Solo, with the boyish Luke Skywalker, the tale of good and evil at the heart of it, bickering droids, the epic baddie that was Darth Vader, all of it. Hook, line and sinker. From then until now, there's not a lot wrong with that first movie as far as I'm concerned. Awesome stuff. To a 6-year-old boy, just fabulous. Whilst we're on the subject of cinema and going to the pictures with do people still say going to the pictures? That was a thing in my house. Everybody would call it going to the pictures. Another trip to the pictures with my father, who's responsible for quite a lot of this, actually, came a few years later. I think in the early 1980s, we went to see Star Trek: Wrath of Khan. I've never seen the first. I didn't see the first one at the cinema, and I don't think I'm not convinced I've ever seen it, actually. So that one passed me by. So my Star Trek movies were really Wrath of Khan and then the follow-up, Search for Spock. I really enjoyed those. I didn't think much of the ones that followed. I kind of skipped The Next Generation, and I kind of rejoined the Trekosphere with the movie reboot from 2005 with Zachary Quinto. I thought that reboot was very clever. I really enjoyed it. I did watch the original TV show, Star Trek TV show, when it was repeated later in my teens. Probably I wasn't born when it was first on, and I didn't watch any of the reruns until my teens. So back to Star Wars. So Empire Strikes Back, 1981. That I thought was awesome. The thing that blew my mind is Darth Vader is what? That whole reveal shocked me and amazed me. I think my dad saw it coming, but I didn't. I was like, oh my God. It's still my favourite of all of the Star Wars movies. Certainly of the original 3, and I think of the many that have followed. I think it stands out pretty well even now. The thing I remember most of all is when the final credits rolled at the end of the movie, there was a little announcement on them before the actual credits came in, which said something along the lines of Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, coming in 1983, like in 2 years, which at the time was a significant chunk of my life. And I just remember feeling outraged and kind of crestfallen that it was going to be as long as that before I could get in and see the third part. I do remember going with my brother, who's a few years younger than me, to a triple bill. So we went to the same Odeon World Hall flea pit and sat there all day watching all three movies one after the other. It was great. So those were all kind of big screen. The smaller screen was not without its attractions as well. I was glued to Blake 7 when it was on. Probably now very exposed by its tiny budget, but at the time I thought it was awesome. Avon was the classic anti-hero, usually but not always doing the right thing in the end. Servalan was quite the hottie, for a corporate fascist type. Talking of low-budget special effects, there was of course also Doctor Who. My guy was Tom Baker. I did follow on a little bit with Peter Davison, but I couldn't get over the fact that he was Tristan Farnham of All Creatures Great and Small, which won't mean anything to you if you're in the US, but he played a very young guy in that, and it seemed a bit incongruous for him to be Doctor Who. So anyway, Tom Baker, yes, with that daft robot dog K9 getting on the whole Star Wars droid bandwagon with that creature. I remember watching Battle of the Planets as a teenager, sort of an Americanized version of a Japanese anime cartoon. I particularly liked the Phoenix when he went Fiery Phoenix, which they all needed to do quite frequently to get out of some life-threatening scrape that they were in. And I loved it when they all went transmute in harmony to change into their funky superhero outfits. Loved it. Thought that was brilliant. Something else on the telly that actually scared the wits out of me as a kid was Tripods, which was based on the books by John Christopher. I don't remember a great deal about it. I had the books at one point, but I don't have them anymore. But what I really remember is the TV series, and I think it was pretty terrifying at the time, with the whole mind control thing, the mesh things that they had to have implanted on the head when they got to a certain age to kind of make them do what the tripods wanted them to do, and then the tripods themselves kind of striding across the landscape, those enormous kind of three-legged tripod jobbies, terrifying everyone and borrowing greatly from the War of the Worlds, of course. And talking of terrifying, the Day of the Triffids, back in 1981, that was definitely not a children's programme. I'm actually not sure how I even watched it, because I'm pretty sure I wasn't allowed to stay up that late, but I must have been very persuasive with my parents, or more likely I sneaked down the stairs and watched it through the crack in the door, which would have been left slightly ajar while they were watching it. But Plants That Walk, I remember enjoying that immensely. I haven't seen it since then. I imagine it looks very dated now, but I would really like to get hold of a copy. I'm sure you can buy it on DVD or something. That would be great. Back to the big screen again, although on the small screen actually. I have, because of course you could. We're getting into the era now where you could have videos at home. Well, that was quite a revelation at the time. But I have very strong memories of going to my best mate Darren's 11th birthday. I think it was his 11th. It might have been 10th. The main attraction being to watch a movie on their newfangled VHS machine, and the one that his parents had wisely chosen to rent for a group of 11-year-olds was Ridley Scott's Alien. And whilst there isn't a great deal of actual gore apart from the obvious John Hurt scene on the kitchen table, there's plenty of suspense and implied terror which scared the bejesus out of me. And I remember watching it from behind the sofa through a crack in my fingers, and I had fucking nightmares for weeks afterwards. I don't know what they were thinking, but I have loved that movie ever since, so perhaps it wasn't all bad. And then of course there was the TV adaptation of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, of course, on the BBC, which was aired in early 1983, so I was 12 nearly at that time. Yet another thing that I probably wasn't allowed to stay up to watch, but somehow managed to. I did subsequently read the books, but I came to it through the TV programme. Okay, so that's enough of the silver screen, both large and small. So what happened with books? So we've kind of got to the period where I'm 10, 11, 12, that sort of age. I've seen a few things on the movies and on the TV. I'm engaged and excited about it, kind of, but I'm still reading kind of kids' books, really. So first, I have talked about this before, because when I got this book in a book haul a while back, but my first official science fiction reading experience was this book. Not this actual book. The actual book is long gone, but I found this in an Oxfam a while back, and I had to buy it. It's not that hard to find. You can get it online quite easily. Which is a 4-book compendium by, those of you that are in the UK will recognise, St Michael, which was the old brand name for the in-house brand name for Marks and Spencer's. So for some reason, this Marks and Spencer's decided that they were going to issue a science fiction compendium. I don't know why, what entered into their heads, but it contains 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I got to read the book of the movie that I'd seen when I was 5 or 6 and probably didn't understand and have mostly forgotten about, I would think. It's got The Day of the Triffids, which I was later to see on the TV screen, and it's got The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester, and it's got I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. So those are 4 pretty classic science fiction books, and that was my first introduction to SF proper in book form, and I gobbled it up. Of those 4, Day of the Triffids was my favourite, probably followed by 2001, then I, Robot, which isn't that strong a story, honestly, and then The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester, which seemed quite old-fashioned to me because it had quite a sort of 50s aesthetic to it, I thought. Not that I was really equipped to be that critical age 10 or 11, whatever it was that I was. But anyway, I really enjoyed them, and I read them kind of again and again and again. My aunt I somehow got wind, or maybe I just stole them off her shelves, that's quite likely actually. She was a fan of Isaac Asimov. She had quite a lot of his short stories on her shelves at her house. I've still got some of them. I got rid of quite a lot of my science fiction books, nearly all of them. When I was in my 20s, I sold them for pennies, but I did keep some, and this was among them. I've got volumes 2 and 3 as well from that period, and there's a bunch of other things which I also stole from her, borrowed permanently. What's this one? Martian Way. I've got By Jupiter, and Currents of Space, and various other things that I swiped off her shelves and to read, and never really gave them back. I read and reread these short stories. They're probably objectively a bit rubbish, but I through a modern eye, but I really love them, and was kind of transported to a different world every time I read one of them. So this was mine. I bought this with my very own money in the 1980s when they were reissued by Panther, and I really enjoyed them at the time. I've just reread it actually. If you've been paying attention to my August wrap up, then I've read this during the last month or so. I will read the others at some point, but I'm not in any rush to do so. And again, at the time, I really enjoyed them. I didn't stop there with Asimov. I had the Robots books as well. Arguably should read the Robots books first on the basis that they dovetail into the Foundation series eventually, but I didn't know that at the time. And I'm not sure Isaac Asimov did either, because it didn't happen until he got to Foundation and Earth, I think. Anyhow, I've got all of these Robots books in this Grafton kind of 1980s format. I'd really love to get the hardbacks, which you can get, but they're quite pricey. Or maybe I'll just splash out and buy them, but they are expensive to get. This one not so much, but the other ones, Naked Sun and Caves of Steel, are pretty pricey to get in the 80s reissue hardback. In the original form, they're stupid money, but even in the 80s ones, they're tens of pounds to buy. I think I must have got this as a set for my birthday or for Christmas or something. I'm not sure from whom. But this is the first of the 3 Heliconia books. I've got the others. They're in a slipcase set. I didn't get them all down off the shelves. These books blew my mind. I spoke about them a while back in the SF Tropes video that I did. Or maybe, no, it was a book haul. It was a book haul, because I've recently got hardbacks for this. I couldn't quite bring myself to jettison the paperbacks off my shelves because of the nostalgia value from my youth. So I have kept them. But I do now have these in hardback as well, which are quite nice. Anyway, I went on about what the premise of this story was in that video, so I won't repeat myself. Suffice to say that I read it. It was probably a bit over my head at the point that I read it. So these came out in mid-80s. So I was in my this was it originally came out in 1983, but this is a mid-80s reprint. So I was in my sort of early teens. So it wouldn't have gone over my head, but I didn't fully get it. And when I reread it, all 3 of them, many years later, and enjoyed it much more the second time around. It's due a reread, and now that I've got the nice hardbacks, perhaps I will. I went a bit deeper into Arthur C. Clarke's back catalogue as well, having read 2001. So the books that I recall reading and enjoying way back when are A Fall of Moondust, which is a good story. I think I mentioned that in my recent top 10 lunar SF books. There's a kind of tourist bus effectively on the moon that falls into a patch of very fine moon dust and sinks without trace, and they're meters down, and they have to think their way out of it essentially. It's a good story, not terribly long one either. And the other one that I really remember reading and enjoying back in the day was Rendezvous with Rama, sort of big dumb object type story. I've read it recently again, and it wasn't all that good actually, but I remember really enjoying it at the time. Okay, now things get a bit more serious. So in 1984, the David Lynch Dune movie came out, and I don't think I went to see it at the cinema, but I did buy the tie-in book at my local independent bookshop off the high street where I lived, and that's long gone now. But I still now remember that I spent quite a lot of time in that. I still remember the smell in that bookshop in particular. Not that it was just the smell of books, new books. It was a particular smell, and it really takes me back. But anyway, so I bought this and I read it. It blew my mind. I did go on then to read the others, which were in this livery from the 1980s. I had them all, but I got rid of them in my 20s, and for beer money, and I'm busy replacing them. I don't have them all, so I don't have Dune Messiah. I do have Children of Dune, and I think I'm missing Chapter House Dune, so I've got a couple to replace, but when I see them in nice condition, I'll pick them up. But this is my original 1980s movie tie-in copy. I kept this one and jettisoned the sequels for some reason. And this is a little bit falling apart now. There are pages loose, and if I read it, you have to be really careful that you don't loosen them anymore. I have got alternative copies now. I've got the Pennington cover, which frankly is a bit tatty as well, and I've got the movie tie-in version for the recent movie that came out a year or two ago, the Denis Villeneuve one. And I would really like to get a hardback set of all six. And there's a set from, I think it's from the late 90s or from the 2015-16. I can't remember the cover artist, so it's not very helpful, but there's a hardback set of all six that I would love to get. It's quite a minimalist design, but it's consistent throughout them all. Somehow we've forgotten this guy. So I mentioned I watched the TV series, but I also read all the books, and I got rid of those as well. So I've been busy replacing them with the same editions that I had when I was a kid. So this came out probably prior to the TV series, I would imagine, in 1979. So this isn't a first edition, but it's the same edition, not the first impression. And then things kind of moved on. So I went through a kind of US kind of blockbustery phase. I read quite a lot of Larry Niven. I read Ringworld, not this one. I probably borrowed it from the library. When I was a kid, I got quite a lot of books out of the library. And I remember in the science fiction corner there just being a sea of yellow, which were all the Gollancz yellow jackets, which are now quite expensive to get in good condition. But anyway, I borrowed quite a lot of science fiction books from the local library. Used to go again with my dad. Larry Niven's Ringworld I read at the time. I really like to reread it. I remember being a bit blown away by the scale of it and the fact that just how much kind of surface area there is if you were actually to build a ring world in the way that it's laid out in this book. It's huge. Others of Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. This one's Lucifer's Hammer, which is a sort of comet strike story. And the other one I've mentioned a few times that I really enjoyed is Footfall, which is an alien invasion story. Then a bit later, I think not until late 1980s, so I was still at school, not at university yet. I didn't have this copy. I had a paperback, which I've since got rid of because I've replaced it with the first edition. But Legacy of Heorot, which is about a bunch of people on a colony planet. There's a small community on what's the planet called? Avalon, and they set up their colony. Things are going well. They're sort of getting to know the flora and fauna and find their way around and what kills them and what doesn't. These kind of fish analogues, which it turns out have a part of the life cycle of like your worst nightmare horror story alien creature. And those things kind of terrorise them, and they're called the Grendels. It's a bit of a silly book, but I really enjoyed it, and I've read it a lot. I need to read it again. I did also read, I think I'm just about classing this as science fiction. I read quite a lot of Stephen King. I went on a bit of a horror fiction tear in my mid-teens and 20s. Nearly all, there was some James Herbert in there, and some, because it had pervy bits in it which appealed to a teenage boy, and Stephen King, which less pervy bits but better storytelling, I think. And the one that really stuck with me amongst others was The Dark Tower, and this is my copy that I had back in the day. It was published in the US in 1982 but not in the UK, and in this edition until 1988. It's got lovely colour pictures inside, and it starts with the immortal line, "The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed." There's so much packed into that sentence. Who is the man in black? Why is he fleeing? Who's the gunslinger? Why is there a gunslinger? I thought this was a science fiction book. And why is he in a desert? I really love these books, and the if you're not familiar with it, at the back there's an afterword by Stephen King where he talks about this being the longest he'd spent writing a book, or rather the longest a failed book stayed in his head to the point where he wanted to finish it. So he started writing, this one took him 12 years to write, and it's made up of short stories that were published in magazines, and he wasn't sure if he'd ever finish it. He had sort of rough outline of the story from soup to nuts, and he thought it would be 3,000 pages, which seemed enormous to him at that time. I suspect it's much more than that. So I was intrigued by the fact that he didn't know where it was going. He might not finish it. And I've got the second and third in this same livery, and that I bought at the time, and then more recently I've bought the ones that came after. I think I'd like to have them all in hardback, but you can't get these in hardback for love nor money, at least not the first edition anyway. So after my first phase of science fiction and a brief foray into horror, I went on a fantasy streak, as it were. I read quite a bit of Terry Pratchett. I only bought the first 4 books, but I think I borrowed quite a few from the library, so I've got the first 3. This is my original book from back in the day. That's The Colour of Magic, that's the first one. And then of the first 4, my favourite is probably Mort, which is, if you haven't read it, is Mort is a kid who's taken on by Death as an apprentice, and Death has a horse called Binky. I think they're really... I haven't read them for decades, so I don't know if they're funny. I remember them being funny. They certainly appealed to sort of puerile sense of humour of what I probably was at that time, a teenage boy. 1987, yeah, so I was 17 when I bought this. So young enough to be amused. I really enjoyed the Raymond E. Feist books, Magician, the first 3. I mean, he's written dozens now, but the ones that he was most famous for at the time, Magician, and this is the same livery as the book that I had. And then there's a sequel, Silverthorn, and then the third one, A Darkness at Sathanon. I love these books. I haven't read them for a long time. I really like to do a reread, but they're brilliant. I don't have them at the moment because I made the mistake of lending them to my daughter some time back. But he also wrote some books with Janny Wirtz, which was set in the same universe as this, only on the other planet. If you know these books, there's a rift, and people can come through that rift from... I forget the name of the other planet now, but Midkemia is where this one's set, and the other place. So the other books, the what are they called? Daughter of the Empire, Servant of the Empire, and Mistress of the Empire, I think, are almost entirely unrelated to these books, except that they also include Pug, who's the magician who stars in these. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember now the sequence of events, which means he spends some time in the other world. Those are really good books. I don't know how much Janny Wirtz had to do with those. But they were really good. I also read and enjoyed the Belgariad by David Eddings. I had all of these in this format, paperback, when I was a kid. I have got rid of them all. I'm gradually replacing them. I'm still missing books 1 and 2 of the Belgariad, but I have 3, 4 and 5, and I have, I think, all, or if I don't have them yet, I soon will have all of the follow-on series, the Malorian, which I also enjoyed, although this was the big one for me. I started reading it to one of my kids, and it seemed really cheesy to me when I was reading it, so it probably is really cheesy, but I really liked it when I was in my teens. This one was originally published in 1984, yeah, so I would have been in my kind of early mid-teens. I also read and really enjoyed the Thomas Covenant books, a bit controversial these days because of some of the scenes that were written into the books, but I think I actually don't remember those. I haven't read them since then, so nearer to 40 than 30 years ago, so I don't remember much about them, but I do remember really enjoying them. I really like these covers. So again, these aren't the books that I had when I was a kid. I've had to replace them after getting rid of them all. This is a very clean copy, a first edition paperback. I wouldn't mind getting them all in hardback as well, but for now I'll make do. I really like the cover art on this. I read, of course, Lord of the Rings. This is my Alan Lee illustrated mega edition. I had them in paperbacks that I read individually at the time. I bought this while I was at university and had no money. I kind of went without pot noodles for a couple of weeks to afford this. It's still in pretty good condition actually. I've only read it a couple of times since then, and the illustrations in this are really lovely. This is a nice edition of the book. I'm about due my once a decade reread of that actually. A sort of sub-Tolkien kind of book that I really enjoyed at the time when it came out was The Dragonbone Chair. I have it in this massive trade paperback. In fact, the second one I have in trade paperback as well. The third one I've got in a hardback. I'd love to get these in hardback as well, because this is now really tatty, having read it a few times over the decades. They're really good books. I mean, like I say, they're kind of pretty derivative in many respects, but I really enjoyed reading them at the time, and I've read them once or twice since, and I still enjoyed them. But the good news is I didn't stray away from science fiction for very long. Back in the 1990s, so I'm still in my early 20s at this point, Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy. So I read Mars, the first one, that's from 1992. It's actually a proof copy with that I bought at the time somewhere, which has got proof notes in it. The map apparently in this was printed badly. The tint was wrong. I never noticed the notes in the front until just now, actually, and it is difficult to read the map. So it must have been an advanced reading copy or something. But it's been read a few times, and it's a bit knackered, honestly. But it's mine. It's a kind of hard science fiction. It's not terribly emotional. It's quite political, but it's worth slogging it out to read all three, I think, anyway. I haven't read it for a while yet, so it's probably due a reread. I picked up Ian Banks in the 1990s, so let's have a look. Yeah, this one is from 1993. I think I must have borrowed all these from libraries. I don't recall owning them and then selling them in my early 20s, so I think I must have borrowed them from the library. But I was kind of hooked. He has his detractors, but I like the scope and the scale of the books that he writes, and the imagination that he brings to the page. They might not be the best crafted science fiction books in the world, but I really like them. And then in the, I think just about in the 90s, yeah, mid-1990s, Peter F. Hamilton, so the Night's Dawn trilogy, his first big books. I have read since subsequently, I didn't read them at the time, what are they called? The Gregory Mandel books, which I quite liked. They were the first ones that he wrote. I'd quite like to get those as well, if not in nice paperbacks, then in some hardbacks if I can get them. I don't think they were issued in a hardback in the UK. I think you can only get the US editions. Anyway, Night's Dawn trilogy, that's a trade paperback. The other two are hardbacks. I had them in scrappy old paperbacks, which I've since replaced. So I read quite a bit of Banks, quite a bit of Hamilton. Baxter, I think a bit later. Let's see, when did this come out? Yeah, this is late 90s. So the Manifold Space trilogy I read, so we're getting into my pretty much my 30s at this point by the time I read them. And then a little bit after that, Revelation Space. This is the second of that series, Absolution Gap. These are stone cold hard science fiction, and I really like them. So those are my, I suppose that's pretty much, it's not exactly bang up to date, but pretty much my science fiction journey from my earliest memories through my sort of formative years of reading in the 1980s and to an extent the 90s. So I guess you could say that I'm now in, let's call it an acquisitive phase, where I have the disposable income and the inclination, and I am kind of going hell for leather, replacing books, finding new ones. The thing that continually amazes me is how many authors there are that I didn't even know existed, never mind read any of their books. So I'm playing catch up fast, and if any of you have been paying attention over the last few months, you'll note that I've bought a fuck ton of books over the last few months, over 1,000. Well, I've acquired, I haven't bought them all, some of them have been very kindly given to me, but most of them I've bought, mostly cheap in charity shops, but latterly I've been a bit more splashing the cash a little bit more on eBay and World of Books and so on. Still not large sums of money, typically under a £5 for each book. So I'm surrounded by books now. I will do a library tour at some point soon. My shelves are kind of almost to the point of full to bursting, so it'd be worth doing. But if you want to have a look at the 1,000 odd books I've acquired, then you can work your way through my book haul back catalogue if you haven't watched them already. I detail all of them, I think, pretty much in those videos. But I feel like I'm going back to science fiction school, and I'm enjoying it. So authors new to me over the last few months are Robert Silverberg, Bob Shaw, Ken MacLeod, A. Van Vogt, Elizabeth Moon, Octavia Butler, and there's many more where they came from, of course, and I'm gradually working my way through. But it's not all about the past. I'm still buying new science fiction, some new authors that I've really enjoyed, Claire North and Emma Newman. So that's my science fiction journey. What are your earliest memories of seeing science fiction on the cinema or at home on your TV? What are your earliest science fiction reads that you recall in your formative reading years, whenever that was? I'd be really interested to know. But until the next video, goodbye for now.